Well, James Harden was playing with fire. He got burned for a $100,000 fine, but in the end, he still got what he wanted. Late last night, news broke that James Harden was traded to the Los Angeles Clippers, and here is the full breakdown of the trade. The Philadelphia 76ers are sending James Harden and PJ Tucker to the Clippers, and the Clippers are sending Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, KJ Martin, a 2028 unprotected first-round pick, a 2027 first-round pick swap to OKC, which will then become a 2026 protected first-round pick from OKC to the 76ers, along with 2 second-round picks in 2024 and 2029. So in this video, I'm going to talk about this trade from the Clippers' perspective and what it means for them. Quite frankly, I don't think there's much to talk about or analyze about this trade with regards to the 76ers other than to say, welcome to New York, Joel Embiid. Now, this morning, when I was reading the trade and I was trying to figure out what grade would I give this trade, I actually had a really hard time coming up with one because I would grade this trade very differently from a short-term versus long-term perspective, and I don't quite know how to weigh both of them. In the short term, I really like this deal for the Clippers. They didn't give up anybody important, and without a doubt, they got better. Significantly better. Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, all players that at one point I liked, but now way past their primes and not what you would call key contributors by any definition. KJ Martin is a somewhat interesting prospect, but again, if we're talking about the short term, he is not a contributor right now this year. And in return, you get back not only James Harden, but PJ Tucker. And actually, between all the 4 players that the Clippers gave up and just PJ Tucker, I think PJ Tucker is the better role player come playoff time than all 4 of those guys. And in particular, I think where James Harden will really help the Clippers is he's going to help them hopefully win more regular season games. And that might not sound important, but this year in this Western Conference, that is actually really, really important. Because this year, the Western Conference is loaded. As I'm recording this video, the Dallas Mavericks are 3-0, and I didn't even have the Dallas Mavericks in my top 6 in the Western Conference. Not to mention teams like San Antonio and Oklahoma City, young teams that should get better as the season goes on. It is not at all a guarantee that a team even as talented as the Clippers is going to be able to avoid the play-in game. They will actually need to play hard. They will need to try in the regular season. In the past 5 years that Kawhi and Paul George have been on the Clippers, excluding the bubble year that was a little bit weird, they have each missed at least 25 regular season games. And so especially in those games where one or both of Kawhi and Paul George miss, you will really need what James Harden can bring to the table. You will need that primary ball handler, that initiator of the offense, that guy who can finish possessions for you in crunch time. Again, assuming Kawhi and Paul George are out. Generally speaking, of course, when Kawhi is on the court, I want Kawhi to be finishing the possessions that really matter. I want to say I don't have any concerns about the fit between James Harden and Kawhi and Paul George. I think that fit is going to be fine. One thing that I've noticed watching Clippers games this year and last year is that the Clippers really like using Paul George off ball. They almost run plays for Paul George like he's Klay Thompson, which actually makes a lot of sense. Paul George is just one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. The skill sets don't conflict as much as they might seem. James Harden can absolutely still have the ball in his hands a lot. He can still put up a lot of assists playing next to good scorers. I do have some concerns about the fit between James Harden and Russell Westbrook. I think in Houston it worked out for a time period, but in the end it was still not great. It almost seems like to me, if Westbrook has to play alongside Harden, Kawhi, and Paul George, he's almost going to be playing power forward. I know that sounds a little bit weird, and obviously in today's NBA, positionless basketball and everything, we don't really have to name exact positions. He's almost going to be playing, I feel like, a Tristan Thompson, Kenneth Faried type role, just somebody who is like there to set hard screens and just rebound the heck out of the ball. Who cares? It's 2023. Let's just run Westbrook at center. There are games where Westbrook looks like the best rebounder on the entire team. Am I concerned about James Harden's playoff record? Of course I am. Who wouldn't be? James Harden has underperformed in the playoffs consistently throughout his career. But as he showed you last year, even an underperformer like him can have individual games of brilliance, right? He had that one game against the Celtics where Joel Embiid was out, where he really carried the Sixers to a victory. So if James Harden can give you 1 or 2 of those games in the playoffs, this trade already makes him quite a bit better. And in the games where he really sucks, well, that's why you have Kawhi and Paul George to hopefully pick up the slack. Okay, so that is a short term. And like I said, in the short term for this year, I really like it for the Clippers. In the long term, this trade worries me a lot because they gave up actually some significant draft compensation. They had to give up their 2027 first round pick swap to Oklahoma City and their 2028 unprotected first round pick. Unprotected. In the year 2028, Kawhi Leonard will be 37 years old. Paul George and James Harden will be 38. Westbrook will be 40. And there's a good chance that all four of them will be retired by then. Regardless of how those four guys will age as they get into the late stages of their careers, this Clippers team will look completely different in 2028 than it does now. And while there are a few examples of teams built around old cores that are able to transition smoothly into a new era and remain competitive, that is the exception rather than the rule. Usually when teams lose their best players to age or to free agency, it takes a few years, half a decade for them to kind of get their footing under themselves and draft new younger players and sort of get competitive again. You could say in a sense that the Clippers are going all in, if they haven't already, with signing Kawhi and Paul George and giving up all those assets they gave to get Paul George from Oklahoma City, including my favorite, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Steve Ballmer is the richest owner in the NBA, and by quite a margin. I actually just Googled it. Google says he's worth around $100 billion. I don't know how accurate that is, but regardless, he's the richest owner, and it's probably not particularly close. Yeah, it's very clear the ownership and or the front office is really desperate to win a championship while they still have Kawhi and Paul George sort of at the tail ends of their primes. They really think this is a championship team, and I don't blame them. Like I said in my video previewing sort of the championship odds for each team, I had the Los Angeles Clippers as fringe contenders that could be serious contenders if Kawhi and Paul George are both healthy. Now with this James Harden trade, if they're completely healthy, they absolutely belong in the same tier in the Western Conference as teams like Phoenix and LA and Denver. But if once again come playoff time, you don't have both of them healthy, or if you have them healthy and they're maybe a little bit hampered, or they just really underperform, or they take a big step back because of age, and the Clippers don't end up winning a championship within the next 2 to 3 years, this could start to look like a bit of a disaster, because then it means it will take even longer for them to rebuild from a failed attempt at winning the championship, because they don't have their first round picks essentially in the years 2027 and 2028. It's basically going to delay whatever rebuilding process they have by an additional 2 years. And it's not even so much that you delay your rebuilding process by 2 years. Not having your first round picks in these 2 years where you could easily be a really bad team is really, really harmful, because you also miss out on 2 full draft classes full of prospects. This is another point that I've always wanted to make in a video, which is that not all draft classes are created equal. We know this. There are years where there are just not that many great prospects in a draft class, and there are years where there's like maybe 1 or 2 players that end up making all-star teams, and there are years where there are like 10 players that end up making all-star teams. And there are years where you have a Victor Wembanyama that looks like a generational prospect, and there are years where your choices are between Victor Oladipo and Anthony Bennett. For those reasons, in the long term, I really dislike this deal for this team. Obviously, if they win the championship and James Harden ends up playing a role in that, you could say it's all worth it. But yeah, that covers really all I wanted to say about this trade for the Clippers. Like I said, I actually think the biggest value that James Harden and Russell Westbrook bring to the Clippers are that they are able to stabilize them in the games where one or both of Kawhi and Paul George miss. That's going to give them a much better chance at actually winning those games. And in this Western Conference, it's going to be really important. Come playoff time, again, they're definitely better. I don't know how much better they are. I don't know how much they really need what James Harden does in the playoffs, but it'll be interesting to see. And still, ultimately, their playoff fate will rest on the health of Kawhi and Paul George. Okay, that's it for today's video. I don't know if I'm going to make another video talking about what this means for the Sixers. I guess I might wait like a week or two just to see how the Sixers continue to do without Harden. And given what they got back, which is no significant player and just some really potentially good draft assets, it very much looks like they could be heading towards a rebuild. Maybe around Tyrese Maxey, but we'll see. Okay, that's it for me. See you next video.